My name is Jamal Binden. I'm the chair of the board for Movement I'm All for Race Equity. It's an organization that deals with social justice issues, anti-racism, transparency, and issues related to helping challenge the status quo related to issues like that. Um, I have a special guest with me today, Willis Sanders, who's been in the Nebraska prison system and has been attempting to reform the Department of Corrections by participating in a number of self-help groups. We met him many years ago when I was a staff member at Catholic Charities and working with Families and Friends of Inmates, which was a community-based group devoted to helping families and friends across the state challenge the Nebraska Prison Industrial Complex. Willis has testified before the Nebraska Unicamera about his experience dealing with the draconian system. Willis has also worked on several projects and will expose and share some of those anomalies during this interview. The other thing I want to say is that some years ago, Willie Hamilton and Preston Love Jr. helped secure the previous director of corrections, Scott Flake's attendance in the community forum in North Omaha, where he talked about some of those policies and reforms we were pursuing during his tenure. To my knowledge, it was the first and only time that I've heard Flakes, with his lackluster career in Nebraska, appear in North Omaha with community groups that were not handpicked. Again, they sometimes pick their friends who they want to meet with. The other thing is, nevertheless, African Americans have make up about 5 to 6% of the population in the state, but yet we make up 28% of the inmates in the Nebraska Department of Corrections. What gives, as many people say? What goes on? We know there are a few African American guards and other guards of color within that system, and few African Americans in key administrative positions. Historically, there has been few African Americans in leadership over the years, and we're concerned about that, particularly in the Department of Corrections. The parole board is ineffective and needs better oversight. And again, there was an article written in one of the local state newspapers how they basically are not doing a lot of work to deal with some of those issues to get people and to reduce the caseloads. We will talk about what can be done to change and deal with some of these reforms to reduce recidivism. And most of all, we need to involve more personal and community advocates who deal with prison the industry complex to make sure our system doesn't look like apartheid state like some of the other institutions in our state. We know the Omaha Plantation schools and of them, again, they have that same mentality, and so hopefully we can deal with that. But let me start off by saying, Willis, share a little bit more about yourself, share about who you are a little bit in your experience, and then we'll move on to some of these other questions. So let me start there.
My name is Willis, and thank you first and foremost for this opportunity. I really do appreciate being able to come at this point in time where we are with our understanding of the criminal justice system. As to myself, my story begins pretty early, as many of ours do, that I began in the youth center. And I think personally that that is a beginning stage or the entry point for many of us who are ultimately incarcerated later on in our lives. And we just pass through these different portals or places that prepare us for the later imprisonment. So after being kicked out of junior high in the middle of the 8th grade, my behavior, of course, got me engaged with the police. And some pretty simple things at that point, truancy from school, smoking, at some point smoking weed. And we had a gang thing, but our gang is nothing in comparison to what the definition of a gang is now. Me and 4, 5 other guys, we rode on bikes and we hustled newspapers and those kind of things. We were not overly criminally inclined, as I might say. But I evolved through that and ultimately ended up in Kearney, and from Kearney directly to the Nebraska Department of Corrections to the reformatory. And for 18 months to 4 years was my sentence for burglary, which is actually was a trespassing. But I owe that to my ignorance of the law at that point. So I went to prison at 18. I left prison with my last 6 months being incarcerated with seasoned convicts. So by the time I left in those 6 months of spending time with them, I had all the master plans and plots to do crime when I got out of prison.
So
And
in
that,
other words, you learned a great deal while you were in that system then.
right, the
Okay.
counties of crime. And so for approximately the 8 months that I actually was out from being released, I was on my way back to prison. But this time I had robberies to be convicted of, and also a trial for second degree attempted murder, robbery, and a gun.
Hmm.
That was a jury trial, and I'll come back to that later on in some of
Okay,
my
good.
other telling.
Yeah, let me move into the next question because I want to try to get as many of these before
Yes.
we open it up. You know, when I met you working at Family and Friends of Inmates at Catholic Charities when I was there, and I know they did printed ministry for over 20 years. I know they were involved in a lot of social justice, so on. You've been involved in some of these things. What's your assessment of that group at that time? I'm not sure what they're doing today, but back in the day when you and I were involved, what did you think of that, the work that we did or back then? And I'm talking about the thing where
A-
Mel Beckman and Marianne was involved in.
Actually, the beginning and the founders of Family, Friends, and Families of Inmates was John Arias, his wife, my own wife, and myself. We were the original creators of that situation. It ultimately fell out of our hands, and Mel Beckman and them came, and I would say kindly rescued it. Then we lost touch with it from in prison. But our intention in its creation was to create a group of persons who had family members involved or in prison, but no voice. So that grew and developed to several things that we had in mind as well: a newsletter, regular meetings of family members to serve as supports for each other, to try to accomplish in the collective sense things with that common voice about those common shared concerns with the prison system. So that became very much present, very much active, and I believe that it's still reasonably active now.
By the way, where did it start at? Was it in Lincoln or Omaha, or was it statewide? The Family and Friends from your.
It started in the Lincoln Penitentiary, the
Okay,
Department of
gotcha.
Corrections in the prison behind the walls is where it started, where it was birthed at.
Okay, got you. So in other words, it was in Lincoln it started, and then you said behind the walls, but our meetings were always in the community. So was there a community meeting in Lincoln also, like the one in Omaha?
Yes, the inside is where it started, and we had some of those fundamental meetings that several other persons would come in and meet with then the group
Okay,
that's still active, the Seven Step Organization.
got you.
And then outside, there became a push in an effort to have outside persons, family members meet at different places and still continue that force. And
Got you.
so when I was also released, I was able to, with my wife and with John's wife, have those meetings outside, and that's where it slowly slipped out of our hands, I would say, and fell into the best of Mel Beckman and his wife and
Okay, got you.
counterparts.
Now, in recent years, I've been challenged with the parole office, and I know, some people don't know the difference between parole and probation, but parole office is a key thing to help people out in terms of getting out of there. And the article that was in the newspaper said many of them didn't show up to work. Basically, they were just lazy and incompetent. And again, they were making a lot of folks jam out. And my question is, they have new leadership now, which I'm not impressed with the new leadership. But my question is, do you think they can help improve the process and the system that parole office from your vantage point?
I think there's tremendous room for improvement. However, two of the things that I think are very significant need to be understood is who's driving that, what the motive or motivations are, and what the end goal is decided to be. Because like a bird with two wings, but if both of those wings are working in unison and the objective is to hold, stall, and prolong the stay and release from a person in prison, then those ends, while they look like they're opposed to each other, are actually working together. I think that the attention has to be focused on the oversight that's not just administered by the administration, but some outside persons with outside less bias can participate in an active way and have a actual say or determining vote, as it were, and what the outcome is supposed to be and what
Mm.
efforts or energy and resources applied toward that end.
So, Willis, let me ask you this: if you go to up before the parole, they talk to you as a group behind, like on TV. You don't talk to them individually. It's always in a meeting with all of them sitting together. Is that how it works?
That unless there's some extreme circumstances, you actually sit down in front of the 5 members when they're present, and you have those conversations. I think there's some lopsidedness in that because unless you're fortunate to have legal representation of some kind, it's you against them. And I always am kind of thrown by this idea and concept that we forget that as long as we're on this side of the equation, that maxim never goes away. Anything you say can and will be used against you. So nothing except that you put forward positive about yourself is before them to consider. They
Okay,
have every report that's been assembled by your oppressors or by the persons in supervision over you with the attitude and bias against you.
got you. I got you. I know that you are, you're working on me and you had a little conversation a while back, and you're working on some initiative to help inmates, ex-felons, or returning citizens, that's the word they use today, you know, as they're getting out and so on. What are real briefly a couple of things you're working on that help that prison industrial complex? I know there's not an entrepreneur engineering and input sometimes from some people in the community, but what are you working on? Because you mentioned a couple of projects you want to work on. If you could say that briefly, a couple of things you're working on, we can move on.
One of the things of the two that I think is most critical coming out of prison, especially after years, is to be financially literate. I would sit on the yard and guys would come and sit at the table with me, and I would purposely discuss alternative financing and literacy so that they became aware of something other than criminal activities, how to make money, how to create entrepreneurship and income legal for themselves. But I think it's critical that you leave prison with little and no money and little financial literacy that you can create for yourself a means and another reason to stay out of prison. So that's something I've actively put together a 8 to 10 week course to bring that understanding or that knowledge to a person. The second thing I've created is a insurance model of a safety net for everybody coming out of prison or otherwise affected by the criminal justice system so that you have a 24/7 source to call should you have a confrontation as it normally is with law enforcement. Somebody is there to immediately respond, advocate for you, and diffuse or de-escalate that situation.
So, by the way, how would you get funding for these projects you're talking about? Where will your potential funding come from for something you're working on?
What is my what again?
Potential funding. How would you fund these projects? I assume you're working on them and so on, but who's going to help you with those projects? Or is this you by yourself?
Well, the survey that I've taken from the number of inmates, as it were, and other persons, they would be happy to pay for all of the services I explained that this would provide them.
Okay.
Funding would otherwise come from if I create, and I haven't decided firmly as to a nonprofit through grant and so forth funding, as opposed to other investors. And I think I'm confident that those investors who understand the necessity of this and the long overdue need for it will be more than happy to become involved because not solely for the money, but it is very lucrative in its growth potential and that it could be national and franchisable almost immediately after the doors open and business begins to operate.
Good. Now I'm switching up, but we have a new director of corrections, been around for a couple of years now. And have you heard about some of the reforms that he's initiating on his watch as the director of the Nebraska Corrections at this point? Do you know anything about him and some of the reforms they're doing yourself?
I've been, I would say, both fortunate and unfortunate to have some conversations with this young man. And I find him, or I'll say I'm challenged by him, but I also see that I have a few years on him, even in terms of age, and my 40 plus years in the Department of Correction in that whole system, that the things he's doing are more 60% or more for that public opinion to be seen and perceived as well-meaning or well-intentioned. but at the heart of it, the grit of it, that is less than totally redeeming or uplifting and improvement for those persons who are at the bottom of the ladder that all of these programming and policies are being created around supposedly to benefit.
So if I'm going to
That's not
deconstruct
happening.
if I'm deconstructing what you said some of it is showmanship and some of it doesn't get to the root cause of what we need to do to really form that system.
Absolutely.
Okay, gotcha.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think at the end of the day, we wonder what's the outcomes. I've been in a lot of meetings and groups where they could talk long-winded, but you don't see the numbers and the demographics. Now, I heard a lot of people talk about recidivism. That's a big word in corrections, and again, we have that problem. People will get out and then they go back in, get back in. And I was at a 360 meeting, and they were bragging about some inmate or a returning citizen. Next thing I know, he was back in it because he got out and did some crazy boneheaded stuff. And it was some serious crimes that he did, but they were very disappointed because they thought he was going to be the golden person who's going to make some, be a good example. But my question is, why do people go back in and go back out? And I know you said you've been dealing with it for years. What makes this recidivism happen? What does it mean? Reason people keep going back in? I'm not clear on that per se. Well, let's talk to us a little bit
Well,
about that one.
one of the things, and that's why I addressed the financial literacy. And then we can go very comfortably to if you don't know much, you can't do much. If you came in ill equipped, and for the duration of period of time that you're there, you don't acquire any skills that are applicable to your survival, and that's not a good place to be in a state of constant survival versus living a life and managing that. So you leave ill-equipped to deal with the vast number of changes that have taken place outside those inside of you that you haven't come to understand, realize, and fix, as it were. How can you not, except almost by accident, revert to rehabilitation? Is not the proper word, back to the thing that you just came from. It
Hmm.
has to be an ongoing system of change, measurable and even predictable once you create it properly. And the persons who can only create it are the persons who are familiar with it and have made those adjustments themselves, not
Right.
the spectator, but
I
the
got you.
person actually in the mud, as it were.
In other words, we need to make sure we get more of the people who are directly involved in some of these programs so we can reduce that. But switch it up again. I know that there's a program called Rise. I've been aware of them, been around for years. I know they come from a capitalist prisoner, ex-inmate returning citizens. You get out and they get you into business, so they come from an angle that you can earn a living and so on. There's some other self-help groups out there that I'm not aware of, but I know they're out there helping people. There's some religious groups and so on who got out. What is some of your experience with some of those groups who work with people who are getting out of the system, or work with people who've been inside the system? What do you think of some of them, and do some of them stand out to you?
I personally applaud. I was involved with them, and I have an opportunity to continue that relationship and that connection. There's too few of those kinds of specific or intentional groups, and that in part becomes part of the funding that's allowed to flow into those groups. So obviously, if there's groups like that that are producing, as you say, the numbers of those who are accomplished or able to accomplish a better life and is little funded, that's not by accident.
Hmm.
So my concern is that we don't put the resources with the people who need them, and then we say that there's no reason for them to fail, but we deny them the means, opportunity, and even the motivation to accomplish and achieve.
So,
That's backwards.
so basically, what I'm asking you is: are there any groups outside of Rise out there that you work with that you stand out there, got a good working model, and you like what they do outside of Rise? I assume there's other ones, but I don't know
No, not really that immediately come to mind. A lot of it, improperly so, is mental health focused or centered. And that is a significant piece of that ability to accomplish and achieve those things, including extended periods of freedom or longer terms of freedom once that's returned to a person. But that's a small piece, while significant, but it's not a greater piece as being able to create a lifestyle that frees you of eventually that PTSD mindset of having been in prison and having had to live in that culture, in
Right.
that think.
Right. By the way, I like I alluded to earlier, there's also a industry that I wear that help people build furniture, and they have people working and doing some kind of work. And then I know there's a group way back, I don't know if they're still around, where you again they would employ people and they would give them an income. I think it was a living wage income. They could help do some stuff besides license plates and things like that. But again, and then I also know the religious groups. They come on like a bunch of different individuals, but they're proselytize and they want to deal with religion, convert people. Obviously, people get converted. Some of them are get into religion. They won't do some of the silliness things that they've done and got in the first place. So there's all kinds of things out there. But again, I don't know them. I don't hear them. Now, if you had to describe your experience in prison, what is the greatest lesson you learned from being locked up? And I know you've been locked up on a few different occasions, but what's something that stands out to you that you learned by being inside the system that made it improve your life or help you to see an aha moment in our community?
For me, and this is for me, to be savagely committed to following through, to not letting anyone administratively, especially bully you, intimidate you, and make you fearful of asking for and even demanding what you are due and especially what you've earned. My relationship pretty much from day one has been confrontational and combative with the Department of Correction and certainly with the administration. And I had been tagged early on as a management problem. And I say that illustrating I was challenged to manage, that I became proficient in the law and able to navigate their policies, their procedures, their rules, and so forth, that I became an advocate, much to their displeasure and much to their mistreatment or abuse of me for helping other people out of situations, disciplinary, court-wise, and otherwise.
Mm-hmm. By the way, Willis, I've seen recently in the juvenile justice system they lock people behind the cage or the jail, and there's been laws that say you can't keep them in solitary confinement or locked up for too long in isolation. Now, going back to the prison system, they call it the hold, and they have people in solitary confinement. So, two questions I'm calling audible here. Have you ever been in solitary confinement, and what is it like? Because some of us only know what we see on TV. But what's that like? Or have people talk to you about what that's like to be inside the hold, what they call it, and then also what they call solitary? What is that about?
The hole, that for the first 5 years, I probably did more of my time in the hole than I did on the yard. And I think my longest stint was like 10 months. It's a cell, a room, brick that I'm 6 feet, so I could touch both walls,
Mm,
side walls. It's a slab that maybe comes up to your calf that you sleep on, hard cement, a mattress that maybe is an inch or two thick, and sheets. And at the time, back in the day, as they say, it was a hole in the floor where you did your business. But when toilets were installed and so forth, you get 3 days out of your cell for a 10-minute shower. They've ultimately extended it to 15 minutes, 3 showers a week. You were in your cell 23 out of 24 hours, an hour on the yard, weather permitting, and you were in there. And if you became a reader and the book cart came by and you read voraciously, you ate what they fed you, you might be able to order store depending on what your disciplinary penalties were or the level of them. And here's where I seen with my own eyes people go insane
oh, inside the hole.
because
They go inside the hole, and so when they're in there for so long time, they lose it. Wow.
yeah, they lose all sense of reality. There was a couple guys who on a regular basis would hold their tray back so that the guards almost on a monthly basis would go in and beat them up.
Wow.
And it was like an addiction that they could not break. And people are put on medications. The Supreme Court, early in the mid 80s, said that prisons could use psychotropic drugs to maintain and monitor prisons, and they did prisoners, and they did that to me. I had an allergic reaction and spazzed out, as it were.
Wow. Wow. Most people don't know all the details of how these places operate, they see, because I don't think the Department of Correction has done a good job of educating the brutality and the viciousness of the draconian system. And I do know some prisons are worse. I've heard about the ones in Mississippi, Louisiana. They're like torture chambers. And so one of the reasons why you have places that have developed like Attica and the places Rocker Islands, Riker, I'm not sure in New York, all that is because of the guards and the sadistic mentality of them. We only got a couple of minutes before we open up, but I want to also ask you, do you ever get a chance to talk at the college or university? I know the College of Criminal Justice Department at UNO don't do a good job in our community. I haven't seen any of them with any major research studies dealing with corrections. I did know there was an African American woman who did a nice study about how people stay in jail for a long time by race, and then she disappeared after she did her study. I don't know if they put her in victim witness program and sent it to another university or what, but I don't see a lot of the research. But my question is, do you ever get a chance to talk at the colleges or university based on your experience of being inside the Department of Corrections?
I actually had the opportunity to, on a regular basis, talk to a large college number of college students who came in and toured the prison. And then after that tour, I would get an opportunity to speak with them. Then once I was released, I had the opportunity to speak to classes, Peru State College, Grand Island College, and talk to those students on a number of occasions about my experiences in prison, what my thoughts afterward and my experience after that had been. And that was something I certainly enjoyed, but it gave me opportunity to have some input with those persons who were seeking some kind of career or future in the criminal justice system.
Oh, wow. Okay. We're right at the time, but I want to ask you one other thing. Any experiences have you in terms of you ever dealt with anybody who was in the Innocence Project or program? Because I know they were out of Kansas at some point, and I know they nationwide have gotten a lot of people off of death roll, and they know a lot of people have been innocent because we got incompetent prosecutors and county pretenders and stuff who don't do a great job. And my question to you, do you know anybody who's been in the innocent program or project in Lincoln, Nebraska, or anywhere in Nebraska, correction, Tecumseh, whatever, Omaha, who's gotten out with that program? Knew anybody there?
Uh, Not directly like that, I'll say, and I'll qualify it, that I know that they've been involved in. A very good friend of mine I was supporting in his effort to contact them and get to them his information is Preston Tucker, Willie Tucker. I know the Beatrice Six, and this was kind of prior to the whole Innocent Project kind of move, that they had been wrongly convicted. And he was the guy who I shared time in the law library, and he was able to ultimately beat his case as a matter of being wrongfully convicted, him and 5 other persons. Um, it is one of those things that when you get in or they seek to wrap around you, it begins to become greatly opposed, or you get a lot of pushback because of their effectiveness and the fact that it brings out and highlights those improprieties that have been perpetrated by the criminal justice system to ultimately get that conviction. So,
Okay.
of course, nobody wants to have the light turned on them, and that's exactly what the Innocent Project does. So they're not everybody's favorite friend. They're tolerated at best, and any discouragement that can be created or fabricated, they're going to experience.
Good.
The person seeking their assistance and Innocent Project persons themselves.
Right. Before we open up, any other comments before we open it up to the participant to ask you direct questions or comments?
I'm, of course, by default, even one might say, committed that I want to do something significant about and in regards to prison system. I've been there long enough to see the dozens of changes of regimes, of philosophies, of policies and I see where the faults, weaknesses, and deliberate and even malicious practices are done, that cruel and unacceptable has been normalized. And that has never set well with me, that I've always been that opposition to the Department of Corrections and the things that they've done. And I'll close with saying that this time that I just had been returned after 11 years on parole, and in that space of time, not having committed one offense that placed me again before the criminal justice system, court system, that I was returned to prison for 3 years for the minor of things, missing a meeting, missing a curfew, and missing not paying a parole fee. Many people are not even familiar with that. Once you are out on parole for $25 a month, you're directed to pay for administrative things while you're on parole. But those three things sent me back to prison for 3 years approximately after
Wow.
11 years on parole.
Wow. You know what's strange is you would think you would be able to come up with that money or somebody who you and your loved ones would do that. We're going to open it up to folks who want to make a comment. If you could ask Willis a question directly or put it in the chat and we'll have him respond to it accordingly.
Hi, how you doing? This is Polso Biden. I just wanted to ask you one brief question. What would you want to change in the criminal justice system if you had the ability to do so? And I know there's probably maybe a couple things you can think of at the top of your head, but what's the number one thing that you would love to change in that system?
The number one thing that I think that would have the most impacting and almost immediate effect is our being aware of, knowledgeable about our rights, so that before we get a prosecutor against us and a public defender against us, because they both eat out of the same pot, we know what to tell them to do. We know when they're not doing what we need them to do. But all of that is accomplished because we are ignorant and not being critical, because ignorant just means you simply don't know. So my biggest first ask would be that we become legally aware of our rights and how to demonstrate them in those particular situations, that if we make the choices to be in them, that we have made more informed of a choice rather than one by accident default and detrimental to us.
You know, something else hit me as he was talking, he was sharing and he posed as a question. Sometimes we don't know the data. And I know how hard it's been for me to find information about the number of inmates in the Department of Corrections at each location by race, even sometime offense. I've seen some stuff time to time, and I know they used to have a data person who had a PhD, and ultimately she got a job with Douglas County. And again, I didn't hear much what's happening down there, and I don't ever see them do community forums, but I would love to see them share the data, what's going on, their success rate on or how they do things down there, because I don't know what they do and how bad it is unless somebody who's directly like you shared that. But the other question I'm going to ask you is, have you ever heard anything from the crime commission? We have a state crime commission who will seem criminal, but have you ever seen anything from them from the state level, like officials who work for the state dealing with crime issues or questions or whatever? Does that ring a bell?
It does. And my concern with that has been from learning that they even existed, is that you can get numbers, and we all have heard that you can lie with statistics. But if I don't know how to ask the qualifying question, the numbers that you give me with your definition and my and telling me how to interpret it, I have no other reason but to believe your numbers and how you told me to see or understand them. So someone has to, again, with less and no bias, be able to ask the right questions so that you don't get skewed numbers, statistics, and reports and not understand what they mean and what's been left out.
Hmm. You know,
And why.
I had a chance to did a couple of community forums with the state ombudsman, the Department of Ombudsman did with correction, of course, child welfare, and nothing came out of it in terms of long-term relationship in our community. I know the correction Doug is down in Lincoln. I don't see him ever in Omaha doing advisory groups or that kind of stuff. But my point is, who's an advocate for people who are in the system that we can count on. I know the ombudsman also used to do back in the day when Marshall Lux was there. So when I heard a report they do, but I never seen them engaging with people of color or low income people, people in general, to help them become better advocates, improve the correction system in Nebraska. So you do anything about those three offices, or not child welfare, but correction and the ombudsman, about some of the draconian or evil and nefarious things that go on in the Department of Corrections?
Let me be deliberate about this. When you create an office or offices to oversight and to critically, even supposedly, certainly review policies, procedures, and practices of state ran or funded entities, and you don't give them the power,
Okay.
the authority to enforce the corrections that need to be made that they find, is that by accident? And let me close that with this. If after years, and I have said with the guys on the yard, there's legislators who are attorneys. There are attorneys who are lawyers. Lawyers who are attorneys, attorneys who are lawyers. And then the Attorney General's office. How is it possible that these different things get several years later down the line are practiced and implemented as laws within the state that is then discovered that, oh, it's unconstitutional? There's nobody reviewing that as a matter of being a lawyer in the legislature, and there's nobody in the office of the Attorney General who reviews these prior to, that later after the fact and years sometimes is discovered that ultimately this was unconstitutional, and we have to do these several different patch and fix kind of things at the cost of how many of thousands, and how many persons have suffered for these oversights that I don't think is accidental. They can be.
By the way, we use the term jam out and parole. What does jam out mean when people who don't know about jamming out versus parole?
Jam out is when you're forced to complete your sentence, save any good time that you might have the privilege of having restored. Paroling out is based on the statute of law and the good time law in effect at that point in time, that after you've served a marked amount of time, you become eligible for release. Now, here's the caveat. There's people who are sitting several years after being eligible who have spectacular records of accomplishment and achievement, but for no discernible reason outside of some blanket kind of generic explanations are they held and denied parole. I could fix with three easy swipes the overcrowding situation very quickly. The persons who are sitting, who have lost good time and who have improved their behavior, but yet to have that good time restored. That's over 100 people released tomorrow. The persons who are sitting, who have several years past their eligibility for parole, and whose behavior supports their being paroled, who sit instead. And persons who are brought back to prison, to touch on the recidivism aspect. Why are people brought back to prison for sometimes and too many times some of the most petty, frivolous reasons possible? But it all relates back to numbers and how we, by classification system, can tweak the numbers to make a population or a segment of the population more or less that we need for funding different things.
So basically, here's a follow up somewhat, and I let people other feedback. Anybody else want to have a question, feedback, instead of me jamming in and asking other reactions. I was going to ask you why you got 10 years or 12 years of parole versus 5 years. In other words, those kind of things. But sister's on the line. I'm going to let Cynthia say something. Cynthia?
Yeah, I always end up with questions. I was going to ask you, Willis, thank you for being here, by the way.
Thank you.
You mentioned, I think you said a 10-week training or an 8-week. That was one of the comments I heard. And I
Yes.
was going to ask you, what are some things you include? And as I kept listening, I think those definitions like jam out and some other such phrases in the whole would be somehow a part of that training. And this is for the inmates, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so they have achievement, but they've not been given parole. They have behavior earned, but not given parole. Um, what kinds of things? I'm just naming those three because I thought if I was first put in prison and somebody taught me some of the language, I would appreciate it. The library, are they taught that in a few days after they're there so they can actually access some books, even if they might come in against books? So that's one question. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I'm taking this class and trying to learn about the law and the Black community. And I asked Professor Crawford for my project, could I use the new Jim Crow book, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, rather
Michelle
than a film of
Alexander.
some kind. So I told her why. I bought the book. It was 10th edition in 2020. So I've had that book for a few years. So I'm going to be digging into that book. So what's in the training? And the second thing is some comment about this mass incarceration by Michelle Alexander. Thank
Right.
you.
And there's actually another one, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. I have as well. That might be something worth giving some consideration or a
I,
read.
I couldn't see it. Is the color of law?
Right.
The Color of Law by
Okay.
Richard Rothstein.
Well, he came to town soon after I was here and I went to it, so I have a signed copy. I just haven't read it. So actually, I could read two books. So thank you for being here. With this and the other, I might be motivated to read them.
In answer to your question, and thank you for that question, that education used to be a highly acknowledged thing in prison. It's been dwindled down to A, B, E, G, E, D classes, and they upswing now back to college courses that were virtually all but extinguished for a long period of time. I took everything possible to take. I earned degrees and diplomas and certificates for the 20-something years that I was there. So after I got out of my knucklehead stage, I drowned myself in the educational opportunities there. But to like the financial literacy, 8 weeks and some very concrete things I would teach in that dynamic is what money is, how to manage money, how to manage credit, what's the difference between good debt and bad debt, how to structure a business legally, and how to scale that business, how to grow that business, respective to what it is that you might be wanting to do, what resources, funding, and all of those kind of things, so that you become an intelligent and formidable opponent, as it were, in that capitalist opportunity that has its good points and its bad points, of course, depending on how much knowledge that you have in which you can defend yourself, I think might be a fair word.
Yeah.
I have
Go ahead. Another comment? Go ahead.
yeah, hi, Mr. Willis Sanders. I'm not sure if you remember me. My name is Elva. Um, I also thought about another question. I'm kind of thinking about how these resources can be extended to youth that are incarcerated.
Which
Would it
resources?
So would the resources also include youth that are incarcerated, if that makes sense, like not like essentially young people who are not in spaces like NSP, RTC, does that make sense?
Yes, very much so. And I think excellent the question is, because if I had to decide and kind of delegate where or how I was going to implement that, 60% or more would be directed and allocated toward that population. Because who better and who more so of importance should that attention be given to because as we understand, their minds, their interests, their curiosities, and their willingness at that point to change their minds from that environment is very much hardwired to become better criminals, and slicker and more devious is present. No place else would that be more appropriate and more timely, in my opinion.
Hmm.
So let me interject if I can, and that's an excellent question. Can what you say and do at the adult level translate to DC, YC, and Douglas County? Again, I assume there may be other youth facilities in the state and so on, but does what you talk about on the big level, the prison level, can you get into the juvenile level doing the same thing? You alluded to, yes, you can, but how would you adapt what you do for adults that, let's say, for a 15-year-old or 16-year-old who's in Douglas County for an ordinary amount of time?
Well, easy for me because I'm blessed to be able to talk to a variety of cross section of people. I would just put it in the language that they would best and most likely comprehend it.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
A Zen response. Make it very simple and go with the age appropriate. Like we don't teach adult classes at kindergartens. We have to learn how to talk to different age levels. Junior high is different from high school, grade school. I got you. That makes sense. Other questions, other feedback.
Yeah. I guess I did want to ask that question because one of some of the in some of the conversations that I have had with people who are incarcerated is that many of them were in these like youth facilities and they don't have access to a library. They don't have access to essentially like legal information. And obviously at that age, like they don't even know how to navigate the legal system. Yeah.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I've been alive too long, respectfully, to believe or to be naive, speaking for myself, that crime is not created and maintained, and that a failure or lack of resources or materials by one might educate themselves while in prison are denied, that's not by accident. One's ignorance of the law and their rights is not by accident. So why would I equip and arm persons who my intention is to abuse, misuse, and mistreat? How dare I to arm them in any way possible and yet not be caught directly doing so? What would be my reason for not? If I can do it indirectly and accomplish it nonetheless, every day, every minute I'm spending working how to do that. I remove books from the library. I put computer systems in, but on the computer system, I only allow you to access certain and very deliberately selected information. So you're limited to an hour a week, two perhaps, given that they make provisions and allow you to get there and to sit down and do something to fight your case. Not likely in any deliberate way with any meaning.
There's a question on Facebook. Cheryl Weston asks from, what is your feelings about Senator McKinney's LB 1216 regarding education? And I don't know if that's, Cheryl, maybe you have to explain. I wonder if that's that third grade education. You got to know how to read and write by third grade. I'm not sure if that bill number, which one it relates to, or is literacy, because I know he's done with a couple of things.
I think education is critical, and I like actually the verse in the Bible, Hosea 4:6. It said, God's people will perish for lack of knowledge. Now, I qualify that to say who decides what the knowledge base is, who's providing it, and to what end is it to be served. So one has to be self-driven, but certainly wants to be educated, at least to some basic things, and those things that are critical to one having, living, and understanding what truly living a productive and meaningful life is. So if you leave school educated by underpaid teachers, who is a deliberate decision to underpay the teachers actually to teach the children things that are not going to be essential to their meaningful livelihood, then the outcome should be what? That they become scientists and they can't spell cat?
Other feedback, other reactions. Cynthia did ask a little bit about, I guess, mass incarceration. Did you experience mass incarceration in the Nebraska jail system or prison from your vantage point? Looking at Michelle Alexander's book.
I had the misfortune of 23 uninterrupted years of watching the prison change several times in terms of its population and how that population was moved around. And I will explain some of the layers, or I will allude to some of the layers. Sometimes you don't have to even physically move the prisoners to move the numbers or perception of what the population at large looks like. For example, if I change the classification system to say, okay, now we're going to define or qualify persons who are 21 and older who have been incarcerated more than a year, at least twice, to be serious offenders, and move them to maximum classification custody level. But last week, that same demographic were all medium custody inmates. So I can move several different ways by simply changing, for example, something as mundane as one might think is the classification system. And I've juggled some very significant things, certainly that impact the numbers that regard funding and the movement of persons in and out of prison. Then you say, well, we have an abundance of maximum security prisoners, so we need a new facility. So after you've reclassified that group that was medium custody last week to maximum custody, now warranting a need for a maximum security facility, both those things line up, and now we get the money to build this maximum, and then we move some of the people, and now we have a shortfall of the people who were in the previous facility. But what determines how many people are in prison at any given time is the structure of the laws out in the community. Today, we're going to enforce and arrest people for these things and send them to prison. And some of this new sentencing thing, where after you get sentenced for your original crime, you have another sentence to serve afterwards. And then if you mess up on that, you basically pay the toll for both things. I'm still not clear on that.
Quick question is, in terms of numbers, I assume in your experiences, Willis, you met people there for a short time and a long time. In other words, the death penalty, where they've been in there for a long time, and then somebody's been there short. But who do you know? Has there been someone been there really, really short? What's the shortest period somebody's been sentenced to prison in one of our industrial complex prison system?
For months. Now, here's crazy. You have a year. Matter of fact, the sentencing goes like, if you have a year and a day, your sentence is a year and a day, you go to prison.
Okay.
If you have a year, you go to jail. But there are persons who have jail sentences somehow end up in prison. And then you can reasonably stay in RTC, which is a intake facility, and not go into the prison otherwise, but you're going to be counted as having been to prison because now you're on the books as having been to prison. But for that short period of time, you may not actually end up behind the wall or further incarcerated, as they say.
Got it. One of the things, this classification system, most of us don't know about that. I know some of the stuff can be added on more days and so on. We're down to the last few minutes, but I want to give you a chance. Any closing comments or things you want to say before we end? And also, how do people catch up with you if they want to catch up with you on these entrepreneur things and so like that? But yeah, we'll let you close out on that, and then we'll have some closing comments from me.
Thank you. And I'll be very brief. I'm created and I'm establishing a newsletter of sorts, the autopsyreport.news.com. I have a Facebook page for it. Go there and connect, link in. I will be following up very soon with an actual newsletter that you can be a part of. It is going to be open to engagement. I want to share and receive input from those who become and want to share a concern. They're going to be very active in advocating for families and those incarcerated, that voice is restored and things can be done as a matter of concerns addressed, placed before the persons who have the authority and the position to correct them. All of those things, and in that place that you can contact me and offer input, support, encouragement for those things that would be more detailed in their explanation and their end goal that I have and intend to do, that I'm committed to doing. Thank you.
Well, Willis, we really appreciate you, Sanders, of sharing, and wanted to say some of the things I want to close out by saying. Years ago, I used to go inside the prison when we did something called jail ministry, and I had a chance to meet and interact with Mondo and some of the guys in some of those Harambe groups, and I don't know what's going on today. I did go to the one in Omaha for a couple of events to talk to them during Black History Month. Again, I don't know what's going on. I do know that other people try to work on how to get more people to go inside the system to work with people who are returning citizens. So again, prison industry complex is very much in our state and in our country. And so we need to be able to engage people and learn a lot. I wish more people who major in the criminal justice law enforcement would go and see what the system is like to help in some of the reform and so on. But I appreciate you being able to be on the show today, talk with us, and hopefully we'll get a chance to maybe revisit again with some of the things you've shared and get other people. And particularly, I love to see the director of corrections get out in the community and do community forums with all his handlers, meaning external people who don't, know how to criticize. And I do know that there's some so-called advocates who've been doing some teaching or on the payroll, and all of a sudden they don't say nothing about how to improve the system. I'd like to see that happen better with challenges. So on that note, I want to say thank you for being here and sharing with us, and hopefully we'll get a chance to revisit again on some of these issues. How we can improve the Nebraska of correction in their system and get more community people involved in helping returning citizens. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity and a chance to be heard and to listen and give the information and input from your guests.
Good. And folks, on that note, as we always end, may the force be with you, Barocco. And this will be on our webpage as well as on our YouTube page, so we can go back and see it. And also, it should be on our Facebook. But thank you again, as we say, may the force be with you, Barocco.